What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Court Storm College Hoops Talk podcast, which you can find on the Court Storm Media Network. This is our weekly Wednesday episode. We are bringing you guys the first one of the new college basketball season with exhibition games already taking place over the last week and a half now. And me and Josh are just going to break down some of the takeaways we have from the early exhibition games. We'll also talk about our reactions to the preseason All-American team being announced, as well as just a few storylines to watch out for as the season begins. But before we get into that today, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on the Court Storm channel, please engage with the videos in any way you can. If you've kept up, you know that we underwent a rebrand on the channel, so it's important being able to keep our audience as well as grow it. So again, like our videos, subscribe to the channel, tell other people about us. All goes a really long way with influencing YouTube's algorithm, getting more people to watch our videos. So let's get right into it with talking about some of the exhibition games and some of the takeaways we had. I'm going to start with Oklahoma State and Auburn. Josh, I'll ask you first, what were you able to kind of take away? Is there concern for Auburn, or is it more so good that you got from Oklahoma State's performance?
I kind of saw this more of a benefit for Oklahoma State more than anything else. I think the big talk is how Coleman and Roy are these just great, low to high mid-major players that really work well in a, smaller system. Oklahoma State's not really known for their basketball, especially recently, past the Cade Cunningham years, but they picked up a lot of high-level scoring guards. They have a really, really nice front court that I think could be one of the best in the Big 12. On top of this, I feel like they just played good for an exhibition game. It was one of the first games of the exhibition cycle, so I think it was one that got a lot of focus. And for Auburn, this was one of the first, Steve Pearl experiences, so I can't really blame anything much on them. It is a little bit concerning that Dahad did not perform that well, and most of the work was on the Keyshawn's, but it's their first time. It's an exhibition game. I'm not horribly worried, but there is more of a concern now more than ever than there has been on Auburn. But Oklahoma State looks like a tournament team. I really wouldn't be shocked if they made it this year.
Yeah, I'll start with Oklahoma State. This is a team that both me and Josh flagged as having a really underrated offseason and just what they were able to bring in out of the transfer portal. I love the pairing of Isaiah Coleman and Anthony Roy. I think it reminds me of Tyrese Hunter and PJ Haggerty at Memphis last year a lot. You're just going to get high volume scoring out of the pair. Isaiah Coleman last year at Seton Hall was the leading scorer, and he was able to get buckets on pretty much every team in the Big East last year. I do like him making the move to Oklahoma State. I think he fits their system perfectly. Jalen Curry also had a really good game. I mean, that's a guy who doesn't shoot the ball particularly well from three, but can definitely get downhill and get to the cup. Overall, I think Oklahoma State's going to be a really sneaky team in the Big 12, definitely a trap game for a lot of other programs in that league. And I would not be shocked to see them ranked at one point in the year. That might be a hot take that I'm willing to throw out there. Or, like Josh mentioned, being able to make the NCAA tournament. In terms of Auburn, I'm not all too concerned in terms of the talent and just the players that they have. I think there was really good showings out of every one of their transfers outside of Bashir. Tahad Pettiford did not shoot the ball all too well, but he's going to have better shooting nights than what he had. It was an exhibition, could be rusty. He did have the 1-3 to tie the game in the later stretches of the overtime period. I think with 30 seconds left, he had that three that hit every part of the rim, but eventually sunk down. And Keyshawn Hall was really impressive. I think he was by far the best player for Auburn in that game. Keyshawn Murphy also had some good contributions as well. And Kevin Overton, I also thought, shot the ball really well. I think really what it comes down to is Stephen Pearl being able to find the lineups which work and are able to be the most efficient for Auburn to have a good season. I will say, though, I'm definitely more and more down on Auburn the more that comes out regarding the team and being able to see them play. But overall, I'm not super concerned about Auburn. I'm definitely very, very high on Oklahoma State now after that exhibition.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to see just where Oklahoma State goes. But beyond that, there was a lot of really nice exhibition games that occurred and really got us just thinking in general about what we can see from a lot of the high major teams and the ranked teams. A big one for us was St. John's versus Townsend. This was played at Carnesecca, the small home arena for St. John's in Queens, New York. Started off pretty slow and pretty bad. St. John's scored 21 points in the first half and were down 8 to Townsend, so not really the best start. But they picked it up. Hopkins went off. He had his first really good moments since his early Providence days, and I really feel like that was a great sigh of relief because we didn't really know how Hopkins was going to play. But there are questions for the starting roster. Ian Jackson was most recently not named point guard. That was given to, if I'm not wrong,
Isaiah Sellers.
yeah, Zai Sellers, which is questionable at best. And we saw it work, well, questionably on the court that day. Dylan Mitchell stepped up. Jackson had some moments, but there are some talks about where this team goes beyond a few players other than Hopkins and Ejiofor.
Yeah, I mean, Hopkins, being able to see that he was back to form, I think is just so optimistic for that St. John's program. Just seeing that he kind of has that burst and athleticism that he had at Providence. Of course, he really has barely played over the last 2 seasons. He played 3 games last year, and then I think only played in 10 or 11 games a year prior to that before tearing his ACL. And now he's in his last year of college basketball, decided to come to St. John's. Came off the bench as a sixth man for the Johnnies on Saturday, but again, I think he was head over heels their best player that game against Towson. And just to talk about Towson really quick, really just a dynamic showing between the duo of Tyler Tejada and Dylan Williamson. Those two really hurt the Johnnies offensively in the first half. That I think Tejada really posed a matchup nightmare for St. John's and Rick Pitino's squad. Just bigger forward who's able to do a lot, score at 3 levels. I think there definitely was an adjustment period that they needed to be able to figure out how to defend him. And in terms of going back to St. John's, I'm just really concerned because what has everyone been saying all offseason? They didn't get a true point guard in the transfer portal. They didn't address that need. Not that they needed a point guard last year. They had Kadari Richmond, Davon Smith, two guys who were great. I mean, Patino called them awesome. And then in that same tweet where he calls those two guys awesome, he says, let's welcome our next great point guard, Ian Jackson. And it seems like not even game one, first exhibition game, Ian Jackson's already in the doghouse. Both Ian and Zuby Ejiofor sat for the majority of the second half. Rick Pitino after the game said, I just wanted to win the game. So seeing Ian already in the doghouse, Zuby's going to be out there for, most of the games going forward as the preseason Big East Player of the Year. But just seeing that, of course, it appears that the Ian Jackson experiment at point guard isn't working out. He named Josiah Sellers as a starting point guard, but let's just be honest, he's not a point guard either. You have Dylan Darling come off the bench, but he really wasn't all too impressive in that showing as well. 2 assists to 3 turnovers, I believe he had against Towson. And it just seems like St. John's is fairly stagnant in the half court. They just don't seem to really have an offensive identity right now. And I'm sure Rick Pitino is going to hammer that home and try to address that issue. But I just have a tough time seeing St. John's kind of opening up as a favorite in the Big East, which they are opening up as. And I understand why you would pick them, but I think just the concerns I saw of them really not having a guy who could set the tone and facilitate for their offense really is concerning me if I'm a Johnny's fan.
Yeah, no, it definitely is concerning too, especially when, UConn had their conference, they had their exhibition game. They played Boston College, and that was far more of a blowout. And, Boston College is not really a good mid-major or a good high major. They're more like Townsend, if anything else. But if you're comparing the 1-to-1, UConn being a lot more in a dominant position than St. John's in their exhibition is not the good sign going into the Big East. St. John's was most recently, as of I think today, as of recording, given the number one team in the coaches poll. I don't know if the actual season poll has come out yet, but St. John's will likely be in the same scenario. Zuby Ejiofor was given preseason player of the year in the conference. So there is that just general conversation of, is it St. John's or a UConn? It's pretty much the closest neck-to-neck race for the Power 5 conferences right now. And I'm kind of stuck on the fence. I really felt like St. John's was that team to get it done in the Big East. I still think they are, but UConn is really showing in the preseason that they are looking like the better team.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to quickly cover UConn, of course, I put out the video on the Saturdays in Stores podcast this past Saturday. So if you haven't seen that, definitely check that out if you are a Husky fan. But one point I did kind of forget to mention was how I felt while the defensive energy was definitely better in their showing in that exhibition game against BC, as opposed to what it was the duration of the entire last season for Dan Hurley. I do think that offensively, a lot of what we saw definitely mimicked a lot of the problems which they had last year. Again, I think that's attributed to both Silas Demery and Terrace Reed being out, but Malachi Smith kind of being the smaller point guard and just not being able to run UConn's offense from right behind the three-point line the way it's designed to be ran, where you had Tristan Newton backing guys down to where he wanted to go to be able to execute offense. I think Silas Demery both addresses that issue, and then another thing that was pretty prevalent was just the fact of not having a true creator on the court at the time during the exhibition game against Boston College, where it was like last year, where Liam McNeely kind of was the only true creator on the court. Alex Caravan doesn't really do that. He was the leading scorer against Boston College in the exhibition, but he didn't particularly shoot the ball well because he moved up in the scouting report the way he did last year when Liam McNeely got hurt. And I just think that it's important to have Demery back because he's the guy when the clock is running down, you throw the ball to him, he can go and make a play, create for others, or be able to get into the painted area, draw a foul. He is comfortable taking some of the deeper contested three-pointers as well from what we saw out of what he did at Georgia. And I think with Demery back, that's going to address those issues. And Terrace Reed being back as well, I think will just open everything up for the shooters to space out the floor.
Yeah, no, good point taken. And obviously, you can view more of his content with the Saturdays in Stores podcast here at Court Storm. I think another really big exhibition game that is not getting talked about enough is Ole Miss against Houston. You would expect the number 2 overall team to pretty much dominate an Ole Miss squad that has been ranked as low as 15 in the SEC conference, depending on who you're talking to. Ole Miss and Chris Beard don't do that, and it is a complete turnaround effect of my opinion of Ole Miss. I really feel like this team, even though obviously it's an exhibition game, beating Houston really gives that general confidence that they can be a trap team with games in the SEC. We saw it a lot last year where teams like Vanderbilt would have their home court be a death zone for a lot of other ranked squads. They've won a lot of really good games, particularly at their home court, and got into the tournament on that type of basis. I expect Ole Miss to kind of fit into the same role. I don't know if the Houston game was actually at Houston or Ole Miss or at a neutral court, but regardless of the matter, Ole Miss really fitting well, and Trent Perry particularly fitting well with Ole Miss is a great sign.
Yeah, I got to say, I wish this wasn't a secret scrimmage. This was definitely something I would have tuned into for sure, just to be able to see the Houston Cougars in action, considering they opened up as the number 2 team in the preseason AP poll. But hey, I'm telling you right now, buy stock in Chris Beard and Ole Miss, because Ole Miss is going to be one of the better teams in the SEC this year. I firmly believe, like Josh said, I think they have a chance to be one of the premier trap games in the country this year. And between what they have with Travis Perry, who is rumored to have scored 26 in that game against Houston, I always thought he was good enough going into this year to start on a lot of Power 5 teams. Of course, he was in Kentucky. He was at Kentucky and Lexington, where Mark Pope kind of recruited over him, brought in a lot of guys out of the portal, which were going to take a lot of Travis Perry's minutes that he could have gotten. So, of course, he decides to enter his name into the transfer portal and end up at Ole Miss. And you combine that with what I believe is going to be a big bounce back year from AJ Storr, where I just think Chris Beard is going to let Storr be Storr and just let him do what he does best. I think Ole Miss is going to be really, really good. You also bring back Malik D as well, who I'm really, really high on. And I think that I probably take away more good for Ole Miss than I do bad for Houston out of this game. But that is definitely something to watch out for. There really hasn't been all too much coverage regarding how Houston performed, or if they were missing any players, or just what necessarily might have gone wrong for the Cougars in this secret scrimmage. But I definitely think Ole Miss, buy stock right now because they're going to be good this year.
Yeah, no, and I like the point you made with Houston not being necessarily punished by this. Once again, I don't know who or what led to Houston losing this scrimmage. I do feel like there could be more of a concern on the background players here. Like, did Harwell and Sinak not perform to expectation for the freshman? Is Sharp still a little, unsharp given his ending last year? I don't really know, and I don't think we're really going to find out until we get to opening day, or until we actually probably get to Players Era in a month, where Houston will be the main star of the show, I feel. I will say beyond that, another game I wanted to touch about was Cincinnati and Michigan. That is another surprising win, I should say, in the same way that Ole Miss was. Cincinnati put out a W against Michigan, I think on their home court, despite a 30-point double-double by Yaxel Lendenberg. Great performance by him. Great start to his high major career, but an insane work by Cincy, particularly their young freshman, Shauna Bev. Didn't really know about him beforehand. I've been put on watch. I think a lot of NBA draft guys have been put on watch. He's being considered a one and done based off this performance alone, which is crazy to think about, but he was damn good. And I really feel like that is a huge part of Cincy's offense going ahead.
Yeah, you knew someone was going to have to step up with their scoring once the program lost Jizzle James. John Abayev looks every bit the part. This kid's going to be one and done. I would have him as a lottery pick right now, quite honestly, after that performance. He doesn't play like a freshman from what we saw against Michigan, and he's going to be really good for Cincy this year. Definitely a team to watch out for. The Big 12 could potentially be another trap game venue this year in college basketball. But to talk about Michigan, Yaxel, of course, had one of the two box office performances of the exhibition game so far. I would give the other one to Debanza, who also had a 30-point game. But Yaxel looks every bit as advertised. He seems like he can really do it all in the court. He had 2 threes. He was really just able to get up and down in transition, more so in the second half. Nonetheless, he had 31 and 12. So that's really all you need to know. He was just able to really just get physical down low, be able to get on the glass, of course, and just really punish some of the Cincinnati big men down low. And he was able to convert on a few and ones, shot well at the line. I think he shot 9 for 9 with his free throws. I think that he's, of course, going to probably be my pick for National Player of the Year. I think he's going to have a really, really good year. I don't want to slight Danny Wolf in any way whatsoever. I loved watching Danny Wolf play last year, but I always felt Yass was the better mid-major to high-major prospect as opposed to what Danny Wolf was coming over from Yale to Ann Arbor to play for Dusty May. And outside of Yaxel, I do think there are slight concerns for Michigan. I think it's fair to note that they're 2 big men. Of course, we don't really know who's going to start yet, but Merez Johnson and Ademara both did not play. They had the backup center. I forget his name off the top of my head. I want to say like Wheats. He actually, he struggled defensively. This was a very foul-heavy game. I think Cincy and Michigan combined for 83 free throw attempts in that exhibition game. And Michigan's backup center, of course, or third string center, if you want to call it that. He fouled a lot. That's to be expected. That's a guy who's not really expecting to play, kind of thrown into the fire out of nowhere. But I will say there was a point in the game where he was able to make 2 or maybe 3 threes in a row. So Michigan was able to space the floor with their non-shooters, which I think is a very optimistic sign, considering that you're 2 guys who you go into season not worrying about their shooting between Namari Burnett and Trey McKinney. They both combined for, I believe, what was 1 for 9 from 3 on the day. But you had guys like Roddy Gale combined to shoot close to 40% between those players. And then Ellie Cadeau, really unique game for him. It's tough to describe how I would rate his performance. I was telling Josh, he only had 2 true field goal attempts, I believe, and scored 14 points. He had 12 trips to the free throw line and made all 12. So definitely take that for what you will. But I will say, I do think it is a completely new dimension that we're getting with this Michigan offense in the half court, where last year you have Trey Donaldson, who's more score first. Now you're getting Ellie Cadeau, who is more so of a true point guard, true playmaker guy who can set other people up. Michigan got a lot of good open shots from what Ellie Cadeau was able to do, setting up his teammates, running Michigan's offense in the half court. They just missed those shots. Namari Burnett and Trey McKinney will not always be missing open shots. So I do think that it's unique, but I will say their first half against Cincy was really rough. They did not play with the energy and defensive aggression that they probably should have been, outside of them fouling a lot. But I think seeing their turnaround in the second half is definitely optimistic. And I think we didn't really get a true of what their identity is going to be as a team this year, because I just think their identity is going to be bruising people down low, being physical between Yaxel, Ademara, and Merez Johnson. And they didn't have those 2 guys. So Yaxel's really good. Michigan should be pretty good this year, but of course, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, no, I think it's a pretty strong piece of work for both teams. I think Michigan is in a little bit more of a problem than they were before, but we both never really saw Michigan as an especially good team. I really do feel like their ranking at, I think, 7 is egregious for the time being. And I have not been convinced, and I might not be convinced till conference play. I was talking off recording. Dusty May has never been the best non-conference guy. He wasn't great with it last year, but he really performed well in the Big Ten. And Michigan was one of the better conference teams over their non-conference schedules in the country. So I do expect to see a large bump going into the year, or going into conference play. But as of right now, I'm really just not. I'm really just not into Michigan for that matter. Were there any other exhibition games that you wanted to look into?
I would say there's two. Alabama Florida State was really interesting,
Oh yes,
considering the game I
yes.
believe ended 109 to 105 without the need for an OT period. Alabama needed someone to step up and kind of be that alpha after the loss of Mark Sears. LeBaron Philon looks like he's that guy. He's going to be the alpha this year for that team. Could have potentially been a late lottery pick, decided to come back to Tuscaloosa to run it back for another season. He scored really well in that game. Aden Holloway also played really well. But let me tell you, I mean, it's classic Nate Oates. No defense, 110% offense. Florida State, I think they had a good showing. Take that for what you will, though, because I don't think Alabama's going to be a great defensive team this year. Of course, that exhibition game was a telltale sign. But I am really excited to see the scoring performances we see out of both LeBaron Philon and Holloway this year for Nate Oates.
No, I 100% agree. I actually like where this Alabama team is going. It's very much a Nate Oates specialty to just score 100 points and give 100 points and still win your
Yeah.
game. I love that Nate Oates is the only coach to just casually do that for year after year after year. And I'm glad that, the loss of Mark Sears is not really affecting them. I get it. It is Florida State, which is not a tournament team in my mind. So there are possible concerns with how competitive this game really was. Or was it just you get a bucket, you get a bucket, you get a bucket? We're just not going to really care about defense because we highly expect to just outrun whatever your team is playing on defense. And once again, that's a winning strategy. It is the only school I really feel confident in where the offense is the only winning strategy because, defense wins championships. Everyone can say that for themselves, but Bama has kind of they've kind of flipped it on its head a little bit. I don't exactly expect this team to be better than last year's Alabama team or even the Alabama teams of old, or not even of old, but the past 2 or 3 years. But LeBaron Philon's fitting well. Holloway's fitting well. I hope Jalil Betham, when he gets healthy again, fits in with this roster. I really like where this team can go, and they honestly feel like a better version of Auburn right now. I really feel like the Iron Bowl will be once again great, but I think Bama has worked its way onto the right side of the rivalry, and I think this exhibition game compared to Auburn's loss has been, a bit of a shock, but could be a sign that Bama is just better in the SEC. And I think I know the other game you're referring to, the Baylor GCU game. If that's what you were thinking about.
That was a game that, yeah, I'm fine with going over. I was more so thinking Illinois State.
Oh,
I
that's a
thought
good
there were
one.
some
Yeah, yeah.
good takeaways for Illinois. I'll just kind of go over what I felt, what I was able to take away really briefly. David Mirkovich looks really, really good. If you follow college basketball accounts on Instagram, you've probably seen people comparing him to Nikola Jokic. I don't know about that, but I definitely felt that he scored the ball really well, was really active on the glass. I think he had close to 20 points along with 13 to 14 rebounds. I think what he was able to do playmaking wise out of the post was really impressive as well. Another guy who I felt really, I think you do kind of need to take with a grain of salt because it wasn't an out of this world performance, but I definitely think Ben Humrickhouse has definitely gotten in the weight room and really bulked up, and he looks fit to play in the Big Ten as opposed to last year where he had some really lofty expectations from the Fighting Illini fans and maybe wasn't necessarily able to live up to those expectations. I think some of those were a little unwarranted just considering he's coming from a low group of five school coming up to Illinois to play in the Big Ten. And, it's a big jump to make when you're jumping up to a Power 5 school playing Big Ten competition. I think this year he looks ready for it. I think he was able to get on the glass and really impose his will down low at times. I think he only had 9 points, so again, take it with a grain of salt. Overall, I think this Illinois team's playmaking is going to be really, really good. What they do on the glass between the Visage brothers, which, by the way, Zavonimir came out and said that he hasn't been able to see the rim for the last 3 years. He just got contacts. Watch out for all the other Big Ten programs because Zavonimir might not be missing all too much this year.
Yeah, I love that quote being put in that. That is so funny that
Yeah.
he has reached a level that we didn't recognize he didn't even reach. I always thought he was a rim guy, and now I'm terrified. Well, I really question where this team goes. I love how just well the European players have just mixed in. It feels like the perfect one-to-one transition, which I think we'll talk about later with how the European prospects are fitting into college basketball this season. But overall, I feel really confident with Illinois, and I feel good about Illinois State. They're still probably the best team in the MVC. I expect to see a lot of good news from them going into conference play, but Illinois is just that team. I really expect to see a lot more games like that for them. And a little thing with the Baylor GCU game, it's the Drew brothers legacy game, just
Right.
having their little fun together. And I think Baylor, for a completely new roster, every single player on that team is completely new to Drew's program. It worked out well. Yeah, Skillings looks good. Rataj looks good. I didn't see much out of Obi Abgin, the main transfer from Wyoming, but the roster is pretty well rounded, and their top 10 freshman in Tande Yusufu looks stunning. I hope to see so much more from him. He's really risen in my mind over the past week or so from this game. And not a bad performance by GCU. I think they're going to be a top 3 team in the Mountain West and a team that could possibly get an at-large bid in what should be a weaker Mountain West than the past few years. But just an overall win-win scenario for both squads, I feel, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to say the exhibitions have lived up to the hype so far. I know there's some big ones on the way too, so definitely we'll be trying to watch those as much as we can and be on the lookout for an episode if we do end up covering some of our takeaways from those. Well, let's get into our reactions to the release of the preseason All-American team. They had Braden Smith, AJ DeBanza, JT Toppin, Yaxel Lendeborg, and Alex Condon. Only one guard on that list, and a lot of people are pointing at Alex Condon as a guy who maybe shouldn't be there. The way I look at it, I definitely think he's deserving, but maybe there might be some other guys who are more so. I'll ask you first, Josh. What do you feel about that preseason All-American team?
I think it was not bad. I feel like the Alex Condon pick it's not right. It's just not the right person. I like Condon, but he hasn't performed well enough, and we haven't seen anything from him from his preseason hype to really make me believe. I get it. This is one of the weaker years for centers, but I think Zuby is more deserving. I think Graham Ike is more deserving. I could see a world where Terrace Reed is more deserving. I really felt like the ceiling for Condon was second team. I honestly thought he was a third team guy to an extent because I don't see him being the number one player on this Florida team even. That said, I like the point you mentioned with Braden Smith being the only true guard on this list. In years past, it used to be just guards and then like Zach Edey. And I think we're really seeing a odd reversal, not towards big men, but just towards forwards. I think we're kind of in the Tim Duncan, Dirk Nowitzki era of college basketball where the power forward, the JT Toppin, the Yaxel Lendenbergs of this era are going to be the main stars of the show. Don't get me wrong. There are great stars at the point guard area, like Donovan Dent, for example, that I think could have been named first team depending on how you viewed it. I think we'll see a lot more retribution from a player like him, but it's definitely a first team. I really want to see where the second and third teams go and how they kind of go throughout the year. But this first team is one of the more unusual ones, to say the least.
Yeah, I probably would have picked Zuby Ejiofor over Alex Condon in my own personal first team if I were able to vote for these preseason teams. I also honestly probably would have voted for one of Otega Owe or Tahad Pettiford to be in there as well. It is tough to kind of decide which of DeBanza, JT Toppin, and Yaxel that I would take out for one of those two guards. But I do think that while I understand it does seem like it is going to be the year of the forward, just guys who have size and can score at all three levels, pretty much do anything on the court. But I do think it is kind of tough for me to not see Otega on this list. I think Otega more so than Tahad. As much as I am a Tahad fan. But again, I'm not too mad at the first team. Like Josh said, I will be curious to see the names that are on the second and third team if they do eventually end up putting those out before the season begins. But now let's get into some storylines heading into the year. Josh, I'll ask you first to start it off.
I think a huge storyline, and this is one I've been talking about off camera and in previous episodes, is just how wonderful we could see the international prospects blossom into college basketball this year. I think this is the first big year that the international community is competing in college basketball, which is very unique. Obviously, in the past, you would see most players, the Lucas and the Wembys, just go straight from their leagues. But there are, a lot of lottery prospects that are sitting around in their college campuses that are going to be playing a year, maybe even more, of college basketball, which is so unique. And I'm very excited for it. There are so many names throughout here. I think big ones include Niakolas Avdilis in Virginia, obviously the Illinois guys, the Balkan Five, Omer Meyer, who is actually a freshman apparently at Purdue. I did not recognize this. So that is very, very unique. And we still have to talk about eligibility because a lot of these guys are a lot older than the average freshman, but they have the immediate experience and skill. Even if they are a ton of one and dones, like Dame Sar, for example, at Duke, they expect immediate contribution from day one, which is what every Power Five and even non-Power Five team would want. And this is the big test year, in my opinion. If teams like Illinois don't perform well, or a player like Dame Sar or Oblis does not hold up to the hype and doesn't make an all ACC team, expect to see less contributions and less, looking into prospects in the international community. But if you see the opposite, which I'm expecting to see a great year from Illinois, I'm expecting to see a possible first team all ACC for Obdalis, for example, and many others to rise that we don't really talk about too much because we're just not so knowledgeable about international prospects. It really is so new for the community that we even can't talk about it in full depth. Then expect to see so much more information and recruiting into the international prospect side going into next summer, and expect to see better transfers. Expect to see better international prospects. I'm not saying expect to see a Luka suiting up in Duke clothing, but there are a lot of players of his caliber that are 16 or 17 years old that are playing in Europe that have the opportunity to come here next year. And I really wouldn't be shocked if this year is the caliber or the catalyst for a player like that or a Wemby to come here and really, really shake up the sport.
Yeah, I love that storyline. It seems like almost every program around the country now has at least at minimum one kid who they got from overseas, an international player who, again, might be a bench player, might end up being a big contributor for them. But there's definitely been more of a motivation to look at what is out there internationally in terms of the pro players coming over. Storyline I'll throw out, definitely been more pronounced over the last week, is the eligibility status of Tyon Grant Foster. He was just denied his waiver to be able to play college basketball this season for Gonzaga and Mark Few. He should be able to play college basketball. Everyone thinks so.
Yes.
I'm also I mean, Mark Few had a quote where he said Tyon essentially died twice, where he had two different instances where his heart stopped while playing in a game on the court. And he effectively lost 2 years of college basketball. Meanwhile, we have players, I'm not trying to slight anyone in any way. And, I guess for sake of that, I won't throw names out there. I'm sure you can probably figure out who I'm alluding to. But there are players who have legitimately played 7 or 8 full years, full seasons of college basketball, played in every single game those seasons, that are still playing. 26, 25 years old. I forget off the top of my head how old Tyon is. I think he might be 24,
I think
25.
he's 24, yeah.
Nonetheless, he lost 2 seasons of his college basketball career. And for a process that took this long, where you wait until 2 weeks before the season start, where he had been practicing all offseason, all summer, went through the whole transfer portal process, getting acclimated to Spokane, Washington, and now you tell the guy that he can't play. I just think that's an embarrassment of what the NCAA is. It's very clear that the leadership in the NCAA, which me and Josh both don't really like all too much,
Yeah.
they just haven't done a good job in the sport whatsoever. And this is just adds to the long list of things which they do so poorly, between wanting to expand the tournament, which I believe we will be getting, which don't even get either of us are on that. That's talk for another day. We'll enjoy the field of 68 while we have it. That, how they manage the transfer portal, where they really rolled it out with zero regulation whatsoever, and it just became an absolute free-for-all. Same thing goes with NIL. Not saying players shouldn't get paid. They definitely should be compensated for what they bring to both the NCAA and the schools they play for, but there should have been regulation. Again, it's a free-for-all. There's no cap on how much teams can spend. It's kind of just, okay, they spend that much, we're going to spend this much. Getting back to Tyon Grant Foster, I just feel for the guy. If it doesn't come around and he really can't play college basketball ever again, I really do feel for him, because he is such a talented player. I know he had a down year at GCU last year compared to what he did the year before, where GCU went on that little NCAA tournament run where they were able to upset St. Mary's, and I forget who they played in the second round that year, but
Alabama. That was a good game
Alabama.
too. That was a really good game.
Yeah, great showing from that GCU program nonetheless. But I feel for Tyon a lot. He should be able to play basketball, and I really do hope we'll get to see him in a Gonzaga uniform this year, because let me tell you, Gonzaga needs Tyon to play if they want any chance at being good this year.
No, I 100% agree with you. And I will say there is not a redeeming factor, but there is an ability for Tyon Grant to play this year. If a court order is injuncted, he can be given more time to play. And knowing how long court cases, especially like this, can take, given that it would be filed against the NCAA in its full, it could last for over a year, meaning that Tyon Grant would be allowed to play this full season. But if he's not given eligibility afterwards, it would mean that all of his awards and stats for this year would be nullified. Not the worst thing if you're given a whole year to play. And let's be honest with you, Tyon Grant is an automatic 10 points per game additional for Gonzaga. He really slots well with their lineup, and Mark Few, like Kanaye said, understands where Tyon Grant has been and knows that Tyon Grant can be the main ball handler on a team. Obviously, it's Graham Ike this year, but he would slot in perfectly well with him and Mario St. Superi, the international prospect, getting a lot of hype for the squad. And not saying Gonzaga would be denied from a national championship without Tyon Grant, but this really elevates their game and puts them in the possibility of being a top 10 team, depending on how good Tyon Grant is. Because if he's anything like he was 2 years back, where he was a 15 plus per game scorer, if I'm not wrong, then expect Gonzaga to be top of their game, especially in the WCC, which looks to be in a down year, especially considering how St. Mary's is looking. I think beyond that, you make a really good point, which is how, international prospects and a lot of like multi-time transfers are 23, 24, 25 years plus, and NCAA loves giving out eligibility. They went crazy 3 years back for COVID and allowed it up until last season. I really do feel like there are problems with that alone, but to immediately fix it on Tyon Grant for no good reason other than to maybe slant Gonzaga for no strong ability at all it's just not fair. It's just not fair, and I'm not putting pity points on a man who had a heart attack trying to play basketball for his life. No, I'm not doing that, but it's just wrong. It's wrong for everyone to see, and I hate that NCAA just has no care. And I've said this so many times, and I will continue to say it. The NCAA has never really focused on college basketball outside of March Madness. They haven't really given anything for care, especially for the mid-majors. All they really see is the dollar signs, the same way they have with college football. They've expanded the college football. They made the 12-game tournament. They want to expand that as well. And now they're looking at, college basketball, and they want to see where they can expand in that field. And I just don't see it working out for the, average watcher or the average player or the Tyon Grant Fosters of college basketball, because it just doesn't look good.
Right. And did you have another storyline you wanted to throw out?
I think another really fun storyline, this is one that I think would be more important for next year, just because it has been seen more of a next year issue or possibility, is the mid-major talk with recruiting. I know mid-majors are expected to take a little leap forward this year. They recruited really well in the portal. I think a lot of teams are starting to recognize that not every Power 5 player wants to stay on their school, and a lot of them have turned into, not regressors, but players that want to go to the lower major level and work their way back and proving themselves. I think, Tyon Grant's a really good example. Played at Kansas, went to GCU, hauled out, would play at GCU, would get drafted likely if everything worked out in the real world, I should say. And there are so many players that I think have really slipped underneath the lines and will make a name for themselves. But I also do feel like mid-majors are starting to get an understanding of the portal and keeping players. A big deal this offseason was Amari Moore, the, I think, 2-time player of the year for Quinnipiac and the MAAC, I think the Metro Atlantic. He stayed. He was given every single phone call to every single high major school. He was an insanely talented player. He would have been point guard at so many high major schools. he decides to take away the generational money and possible draft hype around him that he would gain from transferring to like a Kentucky or a Duke. And he stays at Quinnipiac to try and give them their first ever title, like tournament appearance, which is wild to think about. And
Yeah.
you can call it a one-off, but I really feel like that might be a trendsetter in the future, and especially important for general recruiting in the future because we're looking at a lot of small mid-major teams right now, like Sacramento State, that is bringing in former five-star Mikey Williams or Bethune Cookman, who brought in former five stars that just never really found their place in the systems in the Power Five. And I think these teams are really going to show off their abilities. They might not win any games in March, but they're going to be damn well competitive in their selected conferences. And I think it's really going to be incumbent on these mid-major teams to continue to pursue good, underrated Power Five prospects and even try and work their way into recruiting better high school players because high school players are being drawn out of a lot of rosters at the Power Five level because a lot of Power Five teams are just relying on transfers and international prospects and five stars. The four stars and the three stars are being left behind. And maybe that means they start going to, lower mid majors, which that's a huge deal if you're going to ask me.
Yeah. It's exactly what we saw out of the kid who went to Siena.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Siena recently picked up their highest ever recruit, a 4-star, and he is likely to be paired up with a lot of high major transfers that will see the opportunity in this. And I really feel like if you're that big of a nerd for college basketball, look out for teams like that. Look out for players that really would make great transfers at the low major level, like Draw Gibbs Lawson, who transferred from Illinois to UNLV. He's looking to have a really strong start to his season out there in the Mountain West. I feel like just expect to see these names begin to pop up as the season moves on. And honestly, give me a 15-2 upset. Give me a 14-3 upset. I really feel like March is not going to be what it was last year. It happens eventually. Eventually, you're going to have a 1-seed Final Four. You're going to have, years without, big time upsets. That happens. And I really do feel like looking back on it in the moment, it just was the perfect storm for the high majors. And the mid majors just didn't know what they were doing. I really feel like the learning curve is kind of melted in a lot of mid major teams, either by good skill or general favoritism from their higher major counterparts have given them the opportunity to make those small rises and to gain off of what the high majors are just leaving behind. Like, one man's trash is another man's treasure type of mentality.
Most definitely. And I guess just really briefly before we wrap it up here, I'll throw out one more storyline, which you could argue might be the biggest, if not one of the top three going into the season. It's just if the Gator boys can stay hot and cut down the nets for a second straight year on the first Monday in April. I recently watched an interview that John Rothstein did with Florida Gators head coach Todd Golden, and Todd Golden had a lot of really, really great things to say about Florida. It's really interesting because Florida has been kind of under wraps considering that they're only participating in secret scrimmages, I believe, leading up to the season. So we will not know what Florida is until we see them gear up against Arizona on opening night, I believe it is. 3 versus 13. That should be a really good game. Super excited to see what the Gators look like on court. John Rothstein, I should say, asked Todd Golden what player he thinks has outperformed the expectations that Todd Golden had for that player this offseason. I think it was really interesting the fact that he pointed out Xavier Lee as the guy who surprised the most. This is a guy who me and Josh both like as a player, but do have some concerns in how he translates and adapts to playing now at the Power 5 level in the SEC as opposed to what he was playing against in the Ivy League with Princeton. But Todd Golden has said a lot of great things about Xavier and said he's put on weight to try to adjust to the physicality of the SEC. He says he looks to be the playmaker that he was advertised as at Princeton, one of the better passers in the country, still returning to the sport, and that he shot well from three this entire summer. And you combine that with what Todd Golden said and reaffirming everyone's beliefs that Florida might have the best front court in the country this year between the trio of Thomas Houck, Alex Condon, Ruben Chinielu, then I mean, Florida's going to be really tough to beat. I'm excited to see how Boogie Fland is in year two in the SEC, of course, now under Todd Golden as opposed to John Calipari. I think Todd Golden's going to put Boogie in a lot better position to succeed than what Cal put him in at Arkansas. I know that kind of rough early SEC stretch for Arkansas is tough to ignore when assessing how good of a player Boogie Fland is, but I think overall you combine that with Florida's depth. You have guys like Urban Clavzar coming off the bench, AJ Brown, transfer from Ohio, who I think is going to be a big spark plug for them in the rotation. I definitely think that I'd argue Florida looks better on paper to repeat than UConn did going into 23-24.
No, I 100% agree with you. I mean, Florida worked out one of the best off seasons that any repeat champion has had in the past, I think, decade. And beyond what you've talked about here, I really feel like the possible breakout seasons for Howe, and if we are saying it's true, if Alex Condon really is a first team All-American and he acts like it, then hell yeah, I'm taking the Gators to stay hot. And, they are the top of the SEC once again. I feel like Golden has just understood basketball at a level that a lot of other teams and a lot of other coaches just haven't understood just yet. I'm not ready to say that Florida is my choice for repeat. I still feel like that is Purdue, and I'm not going to be convinced about it until otherwise. But I really like that storyline being brought up. And honestly, I kind of want to bring in one more. I kind of forgot about it earlier, but I think the big talk going into this year and almost every year is who is the top freshman. I know obviously last year was a pretty easy choice with Cooper Flagg, but the waters are getting murkier. I think a lot of talk has been shifted more from AJ Debance to Darren Peterson. He's being put in that first team All-American Player of the Year possible conversations already. He will be carrying a lot of work. He will be carrying so much work at Kansas, don't get me wrong, but the ability to be a walking bucket just makes him that incredibly good of a player. BYU is a very well-balanced team, so Debance is not exactly expected to match anything that Peterson will do, but beyond those two, the depth of the freshmen, especially the 5 stars coming in, is strong. Nate Ament was most recently put in as number 1 player into this class, which is still a little bit egregious. I'm going to be honest, I don't see Ament in that same category, but the hype is starting to get to me. I do feel like he is one of the better underrated freshmen in this class. Cam Boozer is being processed as the next lineage of Duke greats. He's that front runner for ACC Player of the Year alongside the other great freshman, Michael Brown Jr., and then you have guys like Tane Yusufu, Koa Piat, Braden Burries. I mean, toss any name you want, Kanaye, but there are so many good freshmen that are coming in this year.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Peterson to Bance, it really does seem like an even split down the middle between, you could ask anyone, it's a 50-50 chance if they say DeBance or Peterson. I'm rolling with DeBance right now, but that could change at any given moment. Of course, DeBance was on that preseason All-American team that we talked about just earlier. Other people have Peterson opening up on their first teams, and it really could go either way. They're both in completely different situations. We haven't seen Peterson play yet. DeBance just had 30 points in an exhibition game against Nebraska, and he looked really good in that showing. Hey, I'm really, really excited to see these two play and see how their programs play as well, because both those teams are definitely ones I have circled as ones I'm going to try to watch as much as possible this year. But I think overall it's going to take care of everything we had for this weekly Wednesday episode on the Court Storm College Hoops Talk podcast. As always, please engage with the videos in any way you can. Until either next Wednesday's episode or any other smaller ones we put out, we'll see you all next time.